There is a moment in many deeply empathetic people's lives when something quietly changes. They stop asking, how can I keep everyone else comfortable? And begin asking, what is happening inside me? This isn't selfishness. It's a shift in emotional awareness. Because empathy without boundaries can slowly become self-neglect. And sometimes choosing yourself doesn't mean caring less about others. It means finally recognizing that your own emotional well-being deserves the same compassion you've been giving away so freely. The moment empathy becomes self-neglect, highly empathetic people can become so attuned to other people's emotions that they lose awareness of their own needs. Explore how emotional sensitivity can lead to people pleasing, overgiving, and difficulty saying no, and why healthy empathy must include self-awareness. Choosing yourself is not the same as being selfish. Many empathetic individuals feel guilty when they prioritize their own needs. Examine the psychological difference between selfishness and healthy self-care, and how emotional intelligence helps a person recognize that protecting their well-being is not a rejection of others. The psychology of emotional boundaries, inner peace, often begins when we understand that we can care about someone's emotions without taking responsibility for them. Explore how emotional boundaries help empathic people remain compassionate without absorbing every problem, conflict, or emotional burden around them. When people-pleasing finally loses its power, the need to be liked, needed, or constantly available can become an emotional habit. Discuss why people-pleasing develops, how fear of rejection can influence behavior, and what happens when a person begins choosing authenticity over constant approval. Inner peace comes from emotional regulation, not emotional avoidance. Choosing yourself doesn't mean escaping difficult emotions or withdrawing from everyone. True inner peace comes from developing the ability to notice emotions, regulate reactions, and make thoughtful decisions instead of being controlled by guilt, fear, or the expectations of others. For many highly empathetic people, there comes a point when their ability to understand others begins to overshadow their ability to understand themselves. They may notice a friend's sadness before the friend says a word. They can sense tension in a room, recognize when someone's tone has changed, or feel that something is wrong, even when everyone insists that everything is fine. This sensitivity can be a remarkable strength. But without self-awareness, it can also become a quiet form of self-neglect. The problem is not empathy itself. The problem begins when a person becomes so focused on what everyone else is feeling that they stop asking what they are feeling. They become skilled at reading other people's emotional states, but disconnected from their own. They say yes when they mean no. They offer support when they are exhausted. They listen when they themselves desperately need to be heard. Over time, this pattern can become so familiar that it feels like part of their identity. They may believe that being a good person means always being available, always understanding, and always putting someone else's needs first. But emotional intelligence requires something more balanced. It requires the ability to turn our attention inward and recognize our own emotional signals before they become overwhelming. This is where self-awareness becomes essential. The ability to identify your own emotions gives you information about what you need, what is draining you, and where your boundaries may have been crossed. You begin to recognize that compassion does not require constant sacrifice. An empath may eventually realize, perhaps after years of emotional exhaustion, that caring for others should not mean abandoning the self. The healthier form of empathy is not about carrying everyone else's pain. It is about understanding another person's experience while remaining grounded in your own. And that realization can become a turning point. You begin to understand that your emotions matter too. Your energy matters, your limits matter. Choosing to listen to yourself is not a failure of empathy. In many ways, it is the beginning of a more mature form of it. For many deeply empathetic people, one of the hardest lessons to learn is that choosing yourself does not make you selfish. In fact, this can be one of the most difficult emotional boundaries to accept. When you have spent years being attentive to the needs of others, prioritizing your own well-being can feel strangely uncomfortable. You may experience guilt when you say no. You may wonder if you have disappointed someone. And sometimes simply taking time for yourself can create an internal conflict. Shouldn't I be helping someone else? But there is an important distinction between selfishness and healthy self-care. Selfishness is primarily concerned with one's own needs at the expense of others. Healthy self-care is different. It recognizes that your emotional and psychological resources are not unlimited. You cannot continually give understanding, patience, and compassion without also restoring your own capacity to give. This is where emotional intelligence becomes especially important. Self-awareness allows us to notice when we are becoming emotionally depleted. Instead of ignoring those signals, we learn to take them seriously. We begin to recognize that exhaustion, resentment, irritability, or emotional withdrawal may be telling us something important about how we have been living. For an empath, choosing themselves may simply mean pausing before automatically saying yes. It may mean allowing someone else to experience disappointment without immediately rushing to fix it. It may mean taking a step back from a relationship that repeatedly leaves them emotionally drained. None of this requires a loss of compassion. In fact, healthy boundaries can make compassion more sustainable. When we are no longer giving from a place of exhaustion or fear, we can respond to others with greater clarity and genuine care. The deeper lesson is that self-respect and empathy do not have to compete. You can care deeply about another person's experience while still honoring your own. You can be kind without being constantly available. You can understand someone's pain without making it your responsibility to remove it. Sometimes choosing yourself is simply the moment when you realize that your well-being deserves a place in your own circle of compassion. For a deeply empathetic person, one of the most important discoveries is that caring about someone does not mean carrying everything they feel. This distinction can be difficult to make because empathy naturally draws our attention toward the emotional experiences of others. When someone we care about is anxious, angry, or hurting, we may feel an internal pressure to do something about it. We may try to comfort them, solve their problem, or absorb some of their pain. But over time, this can create an emotional burden that was never truly ours to carry. This is where emotional boundaries become important. A boundary is not a wall between you and another person. It is an awareness of where your emotional responsibility ends and another person's begins. You can listen without absorbing. You can care without taking control. You can support someone without believing that their emotional well-being depends entirely on you. For many empathetic people, this requires a change in how they understand responsibility. They may have learned to believe that if someone is unhappy, they must have done something wrong. If someone is upset, they must fix it. If someone is disappointed, they must make themselves smaller to restore harmony. But emotional intelligence invites us to pause and question these automatic reactions. Not every uncomfortable emotion needs to be resolved immediately. Sometimes people need space to process their own feelings. Sometimes a friend needs to experience the consequences of their own choices. And sometimes the most compassionate response is simply to be present without trying to take the pain away. This does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. In fact, Emotional boundaries can deepen empathy because they allow us to remain connected without becoming emotionally overwhelmed. When we are grounded in our own emotional experience, we can listen more clearly and respond more thoughtfully. The goal is not to feel less. It is to learn where your feelings end and another person's feelings begin. Because when you stop carrying emotions that were never yours to carry, you create something incredibly valuable, the emotional space to care for others without losing yourself in the process. For many empathetic people, the need to please others begins quietly. It may start with a simple desire to avoid conflict, to be helpful, or to make sure everyone around them feels comfortable. Over time, however, this desire can become something deeper. Their sense of emotional security may gradually become connected to the approval of others. They begin to feel responsible for keeping everyone happy, even when doing so requires them to ignore their own needs. This is one of the hidden costs of people-pleasing. The person may appear kind, patient, and endlessly understanding on the outside, while internally experiencing exhaustion, frustration, or even resentment. They may say yes when they want to say no, agree when they actually disagree, and remain silent when something deeply bothers them. The difficult part is that they may not even realize how much of their behavior is being shaped by the fear of disappointing someone. Psychologically, the desire for approval can become a learned pattern. When pleasing others repeatedly leads to acceptance, appreciation, or reduced conflict, the behavior is reinforced. The brain begins to associate compliance with emotional safety. Saying no, on the other hand, may feel threatening, not because it is actually dangerous, but because it challenges an old emotional expectation. The turning point comes when a person begins to recognize this pattern. They start asking themselves a different question. Instead of asking, will they be upset with me? They ask, is this consistent with who I am and what I genuinely need? That shift may feel uncomfortable at first. Other people may react differently when you stop being endlessly available. Some may question your boundaries. But this discomfort can be part of emotional growth. The goal is not to stop caring about what others think. That would be unrealistic. The goal is to become less controlled by it. When you can tolerate someone's disappointment without immediately abandoning yourself, you develop a deeper form of emotional freedom. And perhaps this is one of the clearest signs of emotional maturity, realizing that you can be a good person without constantly proving your goodness to everyone around you. There is a difference between finding inner peace and simply avoiding difficult emotions. For many empathetic people, the desire for peace can sometimes become a desire to escape anything uncomfortable. They may withdraw from conflict, suppress their frustration, or distance themselves from situations that bring emotional tension. But emotional intelligence asks us to look at peace differently. True inner peace does not come from never experiencing difficult emotions. It comes from developing the ability to experience those emotions without allowing them to control every decision we make. Our emotions carry information. Anxiety may tell us that something feels uncertain. Anger may signal that a boundary has been crossed. Sadness may reveal that we have lost something meaningful. These emotions are not necessarily problems that need to be eliminated. They are signals that deserve to be understood. This is particularly important for empathetic people because they can be highly responsive to the emotional atmosphere around them. They may absorb tension in a relationship or become overwhelmed by another person's distress. Without emotional regulation, they can begin reacting automatically. They may over-explain, withdraw, apologize unnecessarily, or try to fix situations that are not theirs to fix. Emotional regulation creates a pause between what we feel and how we respond. In that pause, we have a choice. We can acknowledge the emotion without becoming consumed by it. We can say, I am feeling overwhelmed right now, rather than allowing overwhelm to dictate our behavior. This is where choosing yourself becomes a deeper psychological practice. It means learning to stay present with your own emotions instead of abandoning yourself whenever someone else is uncomfortable. It means recognizing that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to remain grounded when conflict appears. Over time, this creates a different kind of strength. You no longer need to run from every difficult feeling or solve every emotional problem around you. You can listen, reflect, and respond with greater intention. And perhaps that is what inner peace truly means. Not that life becomes free of emotional storms, but that you become more capable of standing calmly within them without losing yourself. Perhaps the most important thing to remember is that choosing yourself does not mean turning your back on the people you love. It means learning to include yourself in the compassion you so freely offer to others. For a long time, you may have believed that being needed was the same as being valued, or that keeping everyone happy was the price of being a good person. But emotional maturity teaches us something different. You can care deeply and still have boundaries. You can love someone and still choose peace. You can understand another person's pain without making it your own. The journey toward inner peace begins with a simple act of self-awareness, listening to yourself, noticing when you are tired, recognizing when something no longer feels right, giving yourself permission to say no without guilt and yes without fear. These small choices gradually change the relationship you have with yourself. So if you are at a point in your life where you are finally learning to choose yourself, remember this: you are not becoming less compassionate, you are becoming more emotionally aware. And perhaps for the first time, you are giving yourself the same understanding that you have spent so many years giving to everyone else. Take your time, trust your growth, protect your peace, and never forget that your emotional well-being matters too. I wish you the very best of luck on that journey. May you find the courage to honor your feelings, the wisdom to protect your energy, and the strength to choose what brings you genuine peace. Thank you for spending this time with me, for reflecting on these ideas, and for being willing to look a little more deeply within yourself. Take care of yourself, be kind to yourself, and remember, you deserve the same compassion you so generously give to others. Good luck, and thank you for listening.